With infinite complacence, people went to and fro the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Joe Tury and Michael Huntington to talk about the documentary Grand Tower, UFOs and Other High-Strangeness. Guys, welcome on the show.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much.
You know, I felt like I've already talked to you guys before. I was trying to think, I'm like, I'm pretty sure, haven't I already talked to these guys? But then I wasn't sure if I ever had. So if not, then it's about dang time.
This is a new one for me, that's for sure.
Well, I've been listening to you all the way back to when you had Ryan on the show. And I did an auxiliary interview with him. I don't know, that was probably 2016, 17? I don't know. That was a long time ago. But yeah I think we've sort of touched base here and there, but have never been able to do the interview aspect. But it's good that we're able to talk about this film today. So
yeah, and I'm subscribed to your podcast, and I've seen you on all those awesome small town monster shows.
Well, thank you. No, it's so good to finally have you guys on. It's you know, the whole online world is so strange because you do feel like you know people even though you don't. But then again, I know a lot of you guys a lot better than I know some of my coworkers. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of strange like that. But okay, so before we discuss Grand Tower, right? Where is it? Why might it be strange? Why might all these things be attracted to this area? Can you guys both introduce yourselves and your backgrounds?
Sure. Joe Tury, independent documentary filmmaker of the world of the weird. I live in central Illinois, and most of my stuff has pretty much focused on different Illinois legends. Someday I'm going to break across the borders and maybe do some other stuff. But yeah, so I just try to follow that recipe of the small town monsters where I'm just kind of documenting cases as a, like a reporter would do, not trying to sway opinions. I just love these fun, weird stories. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
I guess my name is Michael Huntington. I am a researcher in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It's down in the southern Boot Heel area, right on the Mississippi River. Cape Girardeau has quite a bit of UFO history in its background, aside from, the alleged flying saucer crash in 1941. We also had Dr. Harley Rutledge's Project Identification UFO study project that was ran out of the university here. And pretty much around the area, we have a lot of UFO history. We got the Marley Woods nearby. We got all of the events that took place in 1973 around Piedmont, those encounters. And we're in the research stomping ground of legendary researchers like Ted Phillips and Jalen Hynek. They researched a lot of stuff in this area. And Illinois is just on the other side. So that's how I was able to meet Joe. He was down in southern Illinois researching some of these small town folklore accounts centered around Murfreesboro. There was a cryptid hairy creature called the Murfreesboro Mud Monster, also known as the Big Muddy Monster, back during this time period. And as a researcher of the unusual, of anomalies, I look at all different kinds of anomalous things, whether they be UFOs. That's my primary focus and background. I've been a UFO researcher for 47 years. I go back to the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. I was a member of that organization, if it gives you an idea how far back. And it's been UFOs every day since. But also, I like haunted locations and cryptid spots. I consider all of these to be anomalies. In other words, extraordinary claims that are outside the bound of normal. They're all sort of paranormal in that they're not common, but they all have the same anomalous aspect to them. Somebody has claimed to see something at a particular spot that is unusual, and that interests me. All of these have sort of coalesced in my research, and I focus on GPS positioning anomalous locations down to the square foot as a way to not just learn the case, because I think that's the best way to understand anomalies, is to get into the details of these individual cases, because we're dealing with individual mysteries. Every single claim is its own mystery, and not all of them are equal. So I think we have to look at these, we have to get into the details of them, and try to see if we can find some patterns. For me, geopositioning anomalies, not just for the research benefit, but also in order to see if there are patterns that may be tied to the location, perhaps something physical or something unique to the environment that allows these anomalies to, percolate up more, or perhaps, cultural folklore is just preeminent in certain areas. But either way, I think it's a benefit for us to know these. But I've been focusing since 2015 on GPS mapping anomalous spots. And I have about 6,000 in my database, each individually researched by myself. I don't take, big chunks of random stuff. I think you have to detail down to the square foot in order to determine what the geophysical aspects are. And that's sort of what this film is. It's trying to define what hotspots are, what paranormal hotspots are, outside of just, what you hear on TV. Everybody's like, on TV, they're saying, oh, this is a hotspot because there had been a series of encounters. But I think we need to look at a bigger picture with all of these anomalies, and recognize that there are places like Grand Tower or Marley Woods or perhaps Skinwalker, the Bluegrass Triangle. There's different spots that just have a preponderance of anomalies far and above just statistical probability. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's interesting, and I think it's cool to dive into these and just see all of these things over the decades and sometimes centuries in these small towns. And Grand Tower is one of these places that Joe and I have looked at, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on in this town.
Michael, when you congrats, by the way, with all this data that you're trying to bring together. That's so smart. That's a great way to do it. As far as the 6,000 points that you've got so far, right? Roughly 6,000, right? What is the biggest commonality that you've seen so far as the 6,000 goes?
Well, you're going to see, if you look at like a map of the United States, and whatever the anomalies are, whether they're some sort of cryptid hominid or UFOs or a haunted location, or just a place that has something unusual, like a gravity hill or a cursed area. There's a lot of different folklore that I put native sites, I put Indian mounds, I put a lot of things into my maps to try to not connect them, but kind of correlate and let other people to see if there's connections. But I'm sorry, I lost the question. What was it?
No, that's okay. I was just wondering if so far you've seen anything that stands out as being common in those places.
Yeah, there have to be people. If you look at a map, all of these things coalesce where people are. And the larger the population, the more anomalies you're going to have. So there's certainly a cultural population, folklore, urban legend aspect to a lot of these things. But I'm not interested in, the final supposition. I think logging the lore also gives us cues and clues. In places like Skinwalker, I mean, you can go back into the native lore, and it's all localized in this one spot, but the commonality is there have to be people there. Another commonality is some of these places were there's like a paranormal pinch, where there's like just a statistical anomaly within itself for a lot of these anomalous claims is certain geological aspects and certain geophysical aspects, like iron ore in the ground and running water, I think are aspects to all of these key places that what you would denote as a legitimate hotspot, that have all of these varietal anomalies. I think, as I said earlier, the TV notion of a hotspot is sort of predetermined by, television and UFOtainment and paranormal entertainment concerns. So, although haunted places are localized, so if you look at anomalous places, a haunted house is going to be your most common thing. Because, for one, it's not going anywhere most often. Whatever that place was, that GPS is not going to change. It's going to stay there for all. Yeah, so I like going back to some of these places that don't even have buildings anymore, to see if there are other anomalous phenomena that are reported. Yeah, haunted places, running water. There's a lot of different aspects, but ultimately, as I had said, each of these are their own cases. Some are more legitimate than others. Not all paranormal cases, not all UFO cases or claims or evidence or witnesses, cryptid, ghost, whatever. Sorry, I almost lost my mic. They're not all the same. Some are more credible than others. Some have more evidence than others. Some are obviously hoaxes or misidentifications or misinterpretations that persist because people want to interpret things certain ways. It's always going to happen. There are cases that will be discovered as being hoaxes that will persist, but it's good to keep track of those too because those are ultimately part of these phenomena as well. Okay, I'll stop now.
No, I love the tangents. That I live on the tangents. Don't even worry about that. You guys know. So, and it wasn't even really a tangent. I'm just saying. Okay, so because all this stuff is tied in, we'll get that out in the open. I'm pretty sure we all feel that way to some extent. So, as far as, and I don't expect you guys to go into great detail about this part, but I did lie because I want to ask one more thing before we get to Grand Tower. Is that here's a tangent? There you go. Personal paranormal experiences for either one of you. Do you each have your own, inception story or weird thing or many weird things that have happened to you?
Doesn't everyone? I mean, I haven't seen any cryptid creatures. I haven't seen any UFOs. I have had, the personal paranormal stuff. Is it legit though? I don't know. I mean, my earliest one was when I was like 5 years old and I seen a full body apparition next to my bed. But that could be, explained as just a childhood mind or child's mind, you know what I mean? But to me, it was real. And, just being a guy that like grew up in the forest and things like that, there's always that weird feeling at times when you're alone in the forest, where you just feel like you're being watched or followed. And I had a ton of those growing up where I was just, enjoying being in the forest and then out of nowhere I'm just terrified and had to get out of there type of thing. Again, that can be explained away. I would say my last real experience was about 15 years ago where I had something show up in a house I was renting. And I mean, it physically moved a door and I saw a shadow of its feet on the other side of the door. And then when I got up instantly and looked out, it was gone. So, I mean, and then when I moved out of that place, all that fear that I used to have while living there disappeared. So to me, there was something attached to the property. I don't know. Again, that's probably my most solid one, honestly, is I saw things move and I saw some type of physical being on the other side of the door.
And how about you, Michael?
Well, I should preface this by saying that I've been like a full-time researcher and investigator for about 8 years now. And it's an extension of my mapping stuff. So, I've done these many thousands of mapping spots. So I, started to undertake to visiting them in real life as well in order to document. So I've been to many, multiple hundreds of anomalous locations, UFO landing spots, abduction sites, cryptid encounter spots. I've been to a lot of the research locations of Lauren Coleman in southern Illinois, just on the other side of that's sort of my my backyard. Is I get to visit these original Lauren Coleman locations, and I have done so. And also over here in Missouri is Ted Phillips, and I visited all of his research locations as well as a lot of research locations around St. Louis. So that's sort of my deal. I experience things all the time. I visited, I don't know, 300 haunted spots. And yes, I have seen things. I have experienced things unique to these locations. I have photographed anomalies at haunted spots. I have photographed anomalies at UFO locations. I have seen quite a bit, experienced quite a bit just in these past few years. But as a kid interested in this subject back in the 70s, I was pushed into it more by the culture than anything. So I was into UFOs before I saw my first UFO, which was in summer of 1979. I saw a daylight disc flying saucer. And yeah, that sort of that triggered a key focus within me. After that, I joined the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. After I reported my sighting to them, all of these things were recently found by Dave Marler in the lost APRO files. I can be found in them back when I made my reports and when I became a member back then at the National UFO Historic Record Center. Yeah, it's just bizarre to think that my sighting is part of this record, but I am an original lost APRO file flying saucer witness, and I later ended up joining MUFON and other organizations across the decades, and there's always the nighttime sky watching sort of things where you see lights, but in 2008 I did see or 2006 I did see a a black triangle. So that was my second major UFO encounter. So yeah, ghosts, UFOs, I photographic anomalies, things like that. Synchronicities, I think, as a full-time paranormal researcher, any paranormal researcher will tell you is probably the most common anomalous thing. Those things happen all the time. But I've yet to see or experience a cryptid. I do have a lot of those on my maps, and I've been to some of these spots and I've documented some of these cryptid sites. They're a little harder to map, I think, because you're out in rural areas and the positioning isn't exact. So that's something I'll have to work on. I'll have to dig into some of those BF files there and try to map some of those to see if there's correlations. There certainly were correlations between Bigfoot events and other cryptid encounters, as well as UFO encounters back in 1973 around not just Grand Tower, but all throughout the area, and indeed throughout the entire country during that year. I think 1973 is a fascinating year, and that's the focus of our documentary here.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Joe, just really quickly to Michael. That 1979 daylight disc sighting, do you, looking back, or maybe because of how you felt at the time, do you feel that was ours or that was something extraterrestrial?
Well, here's the thing. We sort of have these dividing lines between, like believer and skeptic. And believer means that you're interpreting something in the anomalous way, sort of within all these cultures. And a skeptic is one that will just deny that, say that it's all prosaic. Ultimately, when when you get down to it, it's just all competing theories. And for these things that we will never know the answer to, I will never know the answer to my sightings. Alls I can do is just guess. Alls I can do is speculate. I can try to find some information that may lean me in certain ways to interpret, even my own encounters or other encounters. But, we have our own biases and all that. I don't really know. I think measuring things in likelihoods, we know that people misidentify things. We know that there are experimental aircraft up there that look weird to us who don't know what we're looking at. Those are possibilities. I will admit all that. Could these also have been alien vehicles of some sort? I have to admit that too. That's within the realm of possibility and probability, but it's on the extreme end as of likelihood of interpretation. It's also in a biasing end because there is a long line of premises that have to be established before you get to those extreme interpretations. And we don't even have those worked out yet sufficiently. We know that there's probably aliens out there just because of probability, but we don't have, the complete evidence, the fulfilled evidence, the required sufficient evidence to end that. So that's one of the many premises that limit some of the extreme interpretations. I don't know. If something is unknown, if something is unidentified, that's okay. We will never know what was flying above McMinnville. All we can do is argue about it. Some people will say it was a flying saucer. Some people will say it was a hoax. Both sides can, merit their or can put their evidence forward to add merit to their claims. But it's going to come down to one's personal persuasive belief. And that's okay. That's fine. I think if something is determined to be a hoax, or if it's admitted to be a hoax, or, if there is just such overwhelming amounts of evidence to, say that something is most likely that, then I think we have to go to that sort of default within the interpretation. But ultimately, we're still not going to know. I don't know. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if I saw an alien spacecraft or a military craft. I think the triangle one that I saw in Cape Girardeau traversing the moon most likely is probably something that we have within our arsenal. Missouri is one of the places where we keep all of our stealth bombers. They're housed here in Whiteman Air Force Base. All the stealth bombers fly out of Missouri when they bomb the Middle East, and then they fly back to Missouri. So we got some stuff here. We got some unusual triangle-shaped craft. I as a person who has studied aviation, I know that there were companies like Ariane that were building experimental hybrid jet blimps. That their fuel was the very gas that made them lightweight, and the gas also it was usable as a fuel source. The flaming pumpkin seed concept. Before it sort of maybe went black, and maybe we've had these sort of things. These stealth blimps out there, or these certainly we've had these stealth Delta aircraft for quite a while. We've had drones for quite a while. We've had drone fleets since the 60s. So who knows?
I mean, I personally want it to be aliens. I'll also have Slim Whitman ready to go in case, we need to explode some noggins. But I'm ready for it. I'm like the lady on the, the roof of the high rise in ID4 at an Inwell for her, but I'm ready for it. Let's do this thing.
I am down for the aliens coming and making themselves known, and then being asked about UFOs and them saying, "We just got here. You guys are ridiculous."
That could have very well happened. They're like, y'all are
McMinnville was a
crazy.
hoax. If an alien says McMinnville was a hoax, right?
That would be pretty epic too. I don't know. That would be just as weird as them saying it was them the whole time. Joe, please continue your thought that I interrupted earlier.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, sometimes I feel like sensitive to certain things, whether it's at a historic location, could be a historic home or a battlefield, where I just get this real sense of awe. And I don't know if that really means anything, but that's part of my joy as a filmmaker, is going into these areas, and occasionally I'll get that same sense of like what I would get at Gettysburg, for example, and like
Period
in southern
buzz.
What's that?
They call it like a period buzz.
Yeah.
Like within Civil War, it's like when you're at the place and you're in the moment and you're trying to envision, the history through the eyes of the people that experienced it there, you get that buzz. And yeah, I'm very much about that.
Yeah, and like there's a few paranormal hotspots where I've had that too. A couple in Murfreesboro, Illinois, which is just a few miles outside Grand Tower, and in Grand Tower itself. I guess that's what kind of drew me there and keeps drawing me back, is I get those feelings in that area, which is, it's awesome and kind of creepy at the same time.
All right, so let's dive into Grand Tower a little bit. So let's discuss, of course, where are we talking about? What does it sit near? What is with the nickname also?
Grand Tower is a small river town in southern Illinois, supposedly named after this rock formation that's in the Mississippi River that's in that area called Tower Rock. So Grand Tower is just a small community in southern Illinois that has had a lot of weird things happen there over many decades. And our documentary kind of focuses mostly on the 1973 incident, where there was, of course, a huge UFO flap across the nation, and a lot of sightings just in that general area of Missouri, Piedmont, Missouri, and then a really cool one over the power plant in Grand Tower, Illinois, which we kind of focus on and kind of explore the possibility of maybe this being a high strangeness area. And I would like to say, when I started this 3 years ago, I know you guys probably wouldn't feel this way, but like high strangeness, the term wasn't very popular with just people, like just fans of the subject. Like, not popular as in they didn't like it, but not popular as they didn't know what the term meant. And I still don't think the term's like very well known today, because I talk to a lot of people that like watch these type of documentaries and they don't really know that term. And we kind of explore. So I use that term, and now it seems like it's kind of everybody's trying to use it. Everybody's trying to say a certain area is a window area, and I don't want it to come across that way. I mean, I want people to decide on their own. I'm certainly not pushing this place to be like a Skinwalker Ranch or Chestnut Ridge or anything like that. It's just, and I don't call it an area. It's more like a corridor to me. It's like all the way down the Mississippi River from Louisiana, Missouri, where there was Momo, all the way past southern Illinois. It's just like, if you look at Michael's maps, you can see all kinds of things that have happened along this corridor. And yeah, I'm not trying to push it as a window area, because what does that even mean? There's no evidence of any of that, but hope, things have happened there for sure. I mean, that's undeniable.
So what about this term, the unluckiest? What was it? The unluckiest city or town? What was it?
It was, Grand Tower was named. It was a Time magazine, right?
Yeah.
The unluckiest small town in America. due to the fact that it suffered several floods. The Mississippi does flood ever so often and will destroy some of these small towns, and, to where everybody will have to evacuate. And then the government has to come in and clean up and give payouts, and, then they start again. And this town has suffered that. But you also have to look at it within not just the environmental disaster aspect. This town, throughout its history, there's always been something going on to where it's like, man, and then something else, and then you're saying, oh man, that's a bummer too. We have to go back to the rock. Everything is sort of centered within our exploration around this feature that juts out of the Mississippi River. It's not just, an interesting hill or anything like that. We're talking the Mississippi River, and we are talking that in the middle of it is this thing that comes out almost kind of like a little mini mountain. It's this stone mound, and it's got trees on top, and it's a remarkable feature. And it's called the Tower Rock, and it's got a long history going back to the native times, and even, the pre-native times, as being a sacred spot. So we got that, that native lore of it being a sacred spot or a forbidden spot. We're talking 1,000 years of cultures that had viewed this hill within a spiritual context and within a paranormal context. We also have stories of the Spanish conquistadors, the explorers, going up the Mississippi, and that's a good place to put on your map. That's a good marker as to how far you've gone when you find this rock feature right in the middle of the river. That becomes a significant thing. There are stories that had been a Spanish marker. It was Spanish territory for quite a bit of time. Some of the earliest towns there along the Illinois Mississippi River were Spanish towns. And there was the story that there had been a cross up there at one time as a feature. So imagine, you're a Spanish explorer following some of these paths that are looking for, lost cities and gold and whatever. And, not too far, you find all these mounds and stuff around. So it's, you're going up the river, and there's, a big giant cross at the top of this hill. Interesting to contemplate.
So picture a smaller version of Devil's Tower Monument, like from Close Encounters. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how it's shaped, jutting out of the side of the river there.
Yeah.
Well, and it's cool because when you look it up, occasionally the Mississippi is low enough to where you can just walk over right up to it.
Yeah. But later on, throughout history, you have towns getting founded there. Of course, there's tales of Indian massacres because there were native people that had been there, and they had to get rid of them, a couple different times. So there are stories of native massacres. There were 2 native massacres at that location. There were native massacres of the people that settled there as well. So there were counter massacres against the settlers. So, there's multiple horrific events that had occurred there. And also, there's a little ridge, the Devil's Backbone. There's a lot of features that have devil in the name, which is interesting. But along this ridge that overlooks, sort of a narrow area of the Mississippi there were pirates. There were not river pirates, in the sense that, they had like pirate boats and they went arg or anything, but bands of criminals that will live in the hills and in these mountains that would attack shipping up and down the Mississippi, or they would more likely extort, like you got to pay the fare to the criminal guys. So there are those interesting stories. It's intriguing to imagine all these little, ragtag bands of people living on both sides of the river, maybe ropes across the river, and then, locking down the boats and shaking them down. I think that's fascinating.
Well, yeah, and I think that, as I said in the beginning to you guys, that without giving away the entire farm, we'll just give out little nuggets of eggs to folks so that there are some things left to the imagination so they can go watch this documentary. But, it includes hominid creatures, haunted and cursed areas, of course, UFOs, plural. But I would guess that, especially Michael, if I could just continue with you for a moment, I would guess that, I said, oh, well, maybe pick your favorite aspect of the documentary. I would hazard to throw my hat in the ring that your favorite aspect of this documentary would be the main focus, and that would be the UFO case of 1973. Can you let everybody know what was this UFO doing, and the fact that it did have this interesting, and we've heard it before, but it did have interesting physical characteristics that people noticed about it?
Well, I'll set it up, and I'll let Joe knock it out of the park, because he is really the on the boots researcher here who went and found original witnesses to this 1973 series of incidents that people like Hynek looked into it. Yeah, basically 1973 was the year of the humanoid, and it was the year of the UFO. There were stories all across the country, and I don't mean just tabloid stuff. I mean like Walter Cronkite talking about this stuff on the nightly news. And if Cronkite is talking about something on the nightly news, then it's interesting, It's an historic thing. You have all these disclosure people that, get all worked up into a tizzy now because a congressman said UAP, and it's like, no, I think Cronkite doing a UFO report is a big thing. So it was big within the culture, this big wave of encounters, hundreds, thousands of encounters of UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, a variety, just strange creatures. If there was a high strangeness year, it's 1973. People have written books and have done documentaries just on 1973. Within the country, there was people seeing things. And within our area around here in southern Illinois and southern Missouri, this was the center of a lot of it. Piedmont, Missouri is just a little bit west of me. It's within flying saucer flight of Grand Tower. And there within that town, starting in the spring and pretty much going throughout the summer and fall, people were seeing UFO, not by the dozens, but by the hundreds. There were literally like drive-in movie theaters that were having UFO encounters in that town. There were people that were seeing USOs like inside of lakes, under the water in places like Clearwater Lake there. And it was definitely of interest. And, while all this is going on in Piedmont, which was called like the UFO capital at the time, and recently was called UFO capital again by the Missouri legislature to take advantage of and recognize that and take advantage of it for the benefit of the community, which has started having Piedmont festivals now. That was the center of everything. And while that was going on, stuff was going on over in Grand Tower, not too far away. People were seeing cryptids, the Murfreesboro mud monster and other creatures, and people were seeing UFOs on the Missouri side of the Mississippi and on the Illinois side, actually all up and down the area, very far over to Carbondale. And people were also seeing cryptids all the way down as far as like Cairo, and UFOs over in the Boot Heel of Missouri. Like, it was just crazy. And the main case that we are looking at here in Grand Tower, I think is one that was kind of overlooked a little bit. I'm not too far from there. It's a half an hour away from me. So, I've taken an interest in trying to look at some of these old cold cases to see if, there's anything that we can study and if there's people that we can reach out to. And after working with Joe sort of, after I gave him, some of the research materials, I showed him some of the original articles and pointed him in the right direction. Joe just went off and became a legit UFO researcher and looked into this case in detail and found original witnesses to a 1973 case that other researchers didn't bother, to look at. And hats off to him, because he's going to be able to share that, through this documentary, he's able to share this information, to get people interested in these cases, but he's also preserving, the research. He's getting things down on record for the benefit of the subject and its history. He did a great thing, I think, in talking whatever the ultimate end is, and I don't think there will be an ultimate end. I think it will remain anomalous. All of this stuff will remain anomalous unless you have evidence one way or another. But yeah, I'll let Joe dive into the incident at the power plant, which is, I think, a classic case now and part of the 1973 wave.
Yeah, and of course we don't want to give away everything, but I mean, the main incident in a nutshell is different community members of Grand Tower saw what they believe is a UFO, and it, what came out in the interviews with people is that wasn't known before is that it was kind of hanging around the town a little bit before it was reported over the power plant. And so it was one of my eyewitnesses told me, and that we did an audio interview with her, but she saw it for maybe half hour to 40 minutes or so out in the field outside the town for a while before she notified her parents, who then they kind of watched it do its thing, and then they saw it go over to the power plant. The main person that Jerome Clark interviewed for Fate magazine back in 74, he's the one that called the power plant to one of his buddies there and said, hey, kind of look outside it. Can you confirm what I'm seeing? And the guy did. Like he saw something that was maybe a couple hundred yards away hovering there. He had to call headquarters, which Michael talked about synchronicities and things like that. I think that's so true. Like the headquarters is in my hometown here in Springfield, Illinois. So he called up here to report it. I went back outside. It was chased away by jets back into Missouri. And so that's like the nutshell of the event, but certainly affected a lot of people at the time. And I like how even though it seems like it's an important event, that it is kind of like been passed by, even though Jerome Clark reported on it. Dr. Hynek did an interview with the main gentleman that's no longer around, did an interview with him about it. So it's like, why isn't this more well known? Even a lot of the people that live in the town nowadays, it's a different generation. They never heard about it, which I think is kind of weird. But I don't know if that's what, maybe the people that lived back then didn't want to talk about it too much, or just kind of faded away. But yeah, that's like the main story.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. I think that this opens the door to a lot more research within this, because if there were jets seen, then there's a record somewhere. There's a log of jets going to intercept something over a power plant. If a power plant has some sort of power reduction, those things are in official record somewhere, So, and there may be other witnesses, and there may be other, how about the pilots? If there were jets chasing a UFO off, then, who are those people? There's more for this, there's more to look at within this case. And it's a cold case, and it's an interesting old cold case. I found it in an old Fate magazine, from the 70s, and I thought it was interesting because it's my neighborhood, and I started looking into it more, and then I started looking into the town more, and just seeing all this stuff just in this area, within like 10 miles of this Grand Tower feature, this rock feature. You have just so much interesting things going on. A lot of haunted spots, interesting phenomena. Right there at the river, you have interesting electromagnetic phenomena. But all of these stories, these anecdotes, these claims, these narratives that may or may not get resolved. They're sort of secondary to the main premise that we're postulating. All of the researchers within this documentary are experienced researchers within this realm of these subjects. All of these researchers like to archive these small town stories and visit them and document them and share the information about them. So we have some of the best researchers in the documentary in that regards, and that's really the focus of the documentary. The UFOs and all the other stuff is allowing us to say, what's with this place? What's going on with the geography or geology? Why are these things here in this one spot? And we speculate and we contemplate, and people have different ideas, and that's great to see within this documentary. Just some of the great people trying to figure out what these window areas are, trying to figure out what denotes a hot spot, what is high strangeness, how do we determine causal connections between all these things. If is there a single source? What is that? Do we go to Valais and Kiel and we contemplate, invisible realms, alternate dimensions, portals, gateways to other realities, or are there beings, minds that can change perception, that can influence how we see the world, that can shapeshift, that can alter all of reality and manifest themselves in different ways? And for some reason, they're perhaps tied to certain spots, like the Marley Woods or Skinwalker or, Grand Tower. But what allows for that? Is it something physical? Is the veil just a little thinner in this spot than it is over here? Or are we seeing things wrong? Or is it just that there's just a lot of folklore in certain spots? All of these things are fascinating to look at, I think.
Yeah, and we won't give it away, but there are various theories postulated as to why each one just as interesting and plausible as the last, right? We just don't know. Michael said it several times, which I cannot agree with more. Basically, there are no experts. So anybody that says that, just run the other way. I've said that for many years.
Well, I was going to say, there are experts in the sense that there are people that know a lot about stuff, and I think like Zelia and some of the other people, they know their stuff. They've studied, and they've studied the lore and done the research.
Those aren't the ones I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, Michael.
Right, but even the people that are informed, it's opinion, and we don't know, and yeah.
Yeah, and just really quickly, it's a snapshot. These are just a few of the people. He already mentioned Zelia Edgar in there. Steve Ward, Kevin Lee Nelson, and Ken Gerhard are all featured within this documentary, just to name a few. That is not all of the folks that were interviewed for this fantastic documentary. So, Joe, obviously, we've already talked a little bit about the main UFO case, and I would hazard to say that also might be your favorite part. But what's another aspect that is covered? You don't have to go into great detail, of course, but what's another aspect that came up in your research and that is covered in the documentary that you find fascinating or interesting?
I'm more of a cryptid person overall, so we talk a little bit about there's a lot of Bigfoot research in this area. And as a Bigfoot guy, I find that super fascinating. And I mean, if you really believe in the subject matter, which I'm a skeptic, but I'm a hopeful believer, I'll put it that way. You would look at this area and I mean, if you think of Illinois, most people would say Chicago. Well, Southern Illinois is not Chicago. Southern Illinois goes and flows right into your Missouri Ozarks. It's all heavily forested area. I mean, it's Southern Illinois is a little patchy in that, but it's still 300,000 acres of Shawnee forest. And then you go right over the Mississippi River into Missouri, and it's just thick Ozarks everywhere. And I find that fascinating that a lot of people are also encountering Bigfoot activity here. I would love to see one day, or would I? I don't know, but I think that's super cool. There's a lot of research going on both sides of the river. I've talked to a lot of people, not necessarily in the documentary, but people from the region who swear they've had multiple encounters. I know you've talked to some of those people on your show as well. I just find that super fascinating. Enfield Horror is not too far from that area in Southern Illinois. Of course, Michael talked about the Big Muddy Monster. So that's a pretty big legend, and that's only 20 minutes or so drive from Grand Tower and Murfreesboro. And like I said, there's a ton of research going on in Missouri right now. So we kind of touch upon that. And like Michael says, you have to go by case basis. I believe people are seeing things. I don't know what they're seeing. Could be misidentification, could be the real deal. But regardless, I find that super fascinating.
Had no less than 4 Mothman sightings in Cape Girardeau.
Yeah.
Over the past couple of years. How that happens, I have no idea. There have also been Mothman sightings in the Boot Heel, which is south of me. So just throw that into the randomness of all the strangeness that we have around.
I tell you another thing that I think is super cool is, there's like the New Madrid fault line goes right across Grand Tower, right across the Devil's Backbone geological feature there. We've had 2 total lunar eclipses in the last 7 years, and they crisscrossed. The paths of those eclipses crisscrossed right over Grand Tower. So like that's the one section of the country that was in total darkness both times. The Native Americans consider that area a sacred spot. Like, did they know something that we don't know? Possibly. It's a large area for mound builders. There's hundreds of mounds there, or that used to be there. A lot of them were destroyed, but there's still, I was told, like 13 mounds around the Grand Tower area. When we touch on that a little bit too.
Well, and that's a great segue, because if I may, besides the disappearing pack of wolves, the farmer that couldn't take down the mound, like, can't take me down, son. Nope, not going to happen. That was one of my favorite aspects that came up during this. I mean, obviously, besides the Bigfoot stuff is a go-to for me as well, Joe. But I just found the haunted mound and it just fighting this farmer every step along the way. And it's still there to this day. Is pretty damn cool. So I really loved that aspect of it. So before we tell everybody where they can see this documentary, Grand Tower, UFOs and Other High-Strangeness, Joe, you kind of already answered this, but you can just reiterate if you would like. But now Michael needs to answer. If you guys could see one anomalous thing from any, pick the genre, to where it was confirmed without question to you. This is not about filming it and proving it to YouTube. This is about you. To know for a fact this is what this is. Oh my goodness. It's real. It's out there. What would it be?
Well, we know UFOs are real. We don't know what they are. So, okay, paranormal I've already experienced. So obviously it's going to have to be, I need to see a Bigfoot in my life one of these days. Whether that's here in Illinois. I mean, I've been in the Sierra Mountains of California many times. would love to see something out there. But then, you know, people always say that, but like I've seen a bear in the wilderness. I don't want to see a bear in the wilderness anymore. Uh, if Bigfoot's real, and in my opinion, it's a flesh and blood creature, it's an animal, and animals do things to survive. And so, do you really want to have an up and close encounter with one? Probably not. But maybe I'd like to have a drive by, have a road crossing while I'm driving by. That would be it.
Do you want to be a 411 statistic?
Right.
That's a big bag of nope.
Yeah. For me, this will probably surprise some people, but for me, the Loch Ness Monster, I just love that subject. I think it's interesting. It's localized again, so if there's a monster, he's right there, right? And I think there has been some science that has started leading us in the direction to conclude that the Loch Ness Monster is an actual creature, that there is an anomalous physical animal there, and it is most likely some kind of like an eel. They have done DNA tests. They can do that now. They can take like scoops of the loch and test for all the DNA within it, and there are unknown eel DNA showing up in some of these tests. So I think that is something that can be resolved. Not everything. I think the bulk of some of the claims, like any claims, you're just having simple misidentification and a certain percentage of hoaxes. A lot of your famous Loch Ness monster photographs are hoaxes, but there's also just a preponderance of claims that suggest that there's something legitimate, and professional scientific people having encounters. When you have a professional scientist, a zoologist having an encounter, that adds a little bit of credence. So for me, the Loch Ness monster. But as a paranormal nut, I want to know it all. I want to know everything. I want to know all the details to all the cases that I can get. I think most of them we won't, but if there's a monster, he's in that loch, and I think we can find him.
It's a great answer. I appreciate that, you guys. Thank you so much for being candid about that stuff. It's okay to have a UFO guy say, "Hey, I want to see the lake monster." Of course, I mean, why not? So,
well, I think I was just gonna say. Let me add this. I think that out of all the paranormal, unusual, weird, high strangeness stuff, I think sea monsters are probably the most likely, just given the fact you don't know what's in the ocean. So that's the most likely cryptid creature being that exists.
I think that the ocean is far more terrifying than space. I mean, space will kill you quick, but so will the ocean, and God knows what's down in the ocean, even more so than space. I mean, space, like, way out, of course. I think all of us can agree that there, as you said in the beginning, Michael, there is some sort of a quote-unquote alien beings out there somewhere. I think we're all in agreement on that, but God knows what's way down in the ocean. That's really scary. So if you guys could let everybody know where they can see Grand Tower UFOs and Other High-Strangeness.
Well, as an independent, I have to go through a distributor, so I am under their mercy as to when things get put out. So my distributor has licensed it to different streaming services. I believe it's going to show up on Tubi TV at any time. Tubi TV is free. You don't have to create an account. You don't have to sign in. You just go to Tubi TV and search for either my name or Grand Tower UFO. It's not on there yet. I'm expecting it to pop up there anytime. It'll be on a lot of other different streaming services like a Roku channel, and I don't know, a lot of the smaller ones that are out there. So it is coming. I wish I could give you a time frame. I don't know it. I just know it usually doesn't take this long, so it'll be up shortly. Obviously, you can go to my Facebook page, Grand Tower UFOs, and you can get a DVD if you're old school like that. I sell them for a pretty decent price, so you can They're like $16 shipped directly to you. And then if you're more local in Southern Illinois, we are having a screening in January at the Liberty Theater in Murfreesboro, Illinois. And it's for $5, you can see the movie and enjoy it in like an old style theater. So yeah, I would just say for most people, look for that Tubi TV link soon. And I just wish I could give you a better date, but I know it'll be popping on there anytime, and I'll be just as surprised as everybody.
Now, Michael, how about you? Did you want to give out any of your socials or website, anything like that?
Well, those folks out there that know me know that I am a social media animal. I do a lot of discourse and activism, especially on Twitter. If you're one of those UFO Twitter people that likes to debate and argue about the different camps within disclosure and whatnot, I am up there. I promote UFO reform. I am up there as a ufologist promoting ufology and challenging methods and improvement of the field away from a lot of the theatrical exploitation stuff and towards a more grounded research field. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. Instagram has a lot of my travel stuff. I've done my mapping and traveling to spots under Strange Travels. So you can go to Instagram and see those. Just type my name and Strange Travels or UFOs or ghosts or cryptids into your Google search, and I'm sure way too much stuff will pop up, but enough stuff out there to pique people's interests, I think.
Well, guys,
and if I may, sorry, Shannon.
Okay.
I do have a YouTube channel. If you look up Red Room Creative Media, I just recently changed the name of the YouTube to Red Room Films, Legends and Monsters. There's a lot of free stuff for people to check out. Subscribe to my channel, of course, but I have a lot of interviews with some very well-known people, Michael being on there as well. Some free documentary stuff, a lot of smaller, like 15, 20-minute shorts that I've been putting out. So check it out if you like all the world of the weird. It's a fun place to go to.
Well, I appreciate you guys' time today. It's about time that we had a conversation such as this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you, Shannon. I have been a fan of yours for such a long time. It is so great to finally talk to you. Thank you.